The morning of June 19, 1944, dawned with an electric tension aboard the USS Lexington. Lieutenant Junior Grade Alex Morrison sat strapped into his F-6F Hellcat, feeling the machine shudder beneath him like a caged animal. The deck officer's frantic signals told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't a routine patrol. If you are here for quick edits and surface-level noise, this video is not for you. But if you value depth, context, and a real story, stay with me until the end. Below decks, radar operators were watching their screens in disbelief. The incoming formation wasn't just large, it was unprecedented. Japanese Admiral Takeo had committed everything to this single, desperate strike. Over 450 aircraft now bore down on the American fleet like a steel tsunami. Morrison's engine sounded angry, coughing oil onto his windscreen before he'd even released the brakes. The supercharger rattled ominously. By every regulation in the Navy handbook, this bird should have been grounded, but Morrison had spent the previous night fighting a different battle, one with his own maintenance crew, to get this specific aircraft, with its customized armament, onto the catapult. The other pilots called him the mechanic behind his back, not because he fixed planes, but because he obsessed over details that officers were supposed to ignore, while others played cards or wrote letters home. Morrison haunted the armory, questioning every technical specification, every standard procedure. The previous evening, he'd stood in the humid steel belly of the carrier, arguing with a master chief who'd been loading aircraft weapons since Morrison was a teenager. The debate centered on ammunition specifically. Morrison's rejection of the standard loadout. Navy fighters typically carried a mixed belt, armor-piercing rounds, incendiaries, and tracers in a carefully balanced ratio. It was safe, standardized, and effective for general purposes. Morrison thought it was mediocre. Pull the tracers, he'd told the armorer flatly. The chief had sighed, rubbing his weathered face. Tracers helped pilots. Removing them was like driving blind. But Morrison had a theory. Tracers lied. They flew differently than regular ammunition at range, and worse, they advertised your position to every enemy gunner in the sky. What Morrison wanted instead was controversial. A hot belt, loaded almost exclusively with M8. Armor-piercing and these volatile rounds combined penetration with catastrophic fire damage, but loading them continuously risked overheating and potential disaster. What drove this young lieutenant to reject proven tactics and risk everything on an untested theory? The answer would soon be written in smoke trails across the Pacific sky. Morrison's obsession with ammunition wasn't arbitrary, was born from careful observation of enemy aircraft design. He understood something about the Japanese Zero fighter that the Pentagon's engineers seemed to miss. It was a masterpiece of weight reduction, and that made it fatally vulnerable. To achieve their legendary speed and maneuverability, Japanese designers had stripped everything heavy from the Zero. No armor plating protected the pilot. No self-sealing rubber lined the fuel tanks. The American Hellcat, by contrast, was a flying fortress. You could riddle it with bullets, and it would seal itself up and keep flying. Hit a Zero with standard rounds, and you punch clean holes, Morrison had explained to the skeptical armorer, his voice low and intense. Air flows through. Maybe he loses fuel slowly, maybe he limps home, but hit him with these. He held up a silver-tipped M8 round, and he doesn't leak. He ignites. The M8 was a nasty piece of engineering. Its tip contained a chemical compound that burned at 3,000 degrees on impact. It didn't just penetrate, injected a blowtorch into the target's aluminum skin. The other pilots mocked his suicide mix. They said he'd jam his guns on the first burst and spend the rest of the battle as a sitting duck. They told him to stop overthinking, to just point and shoot like everyone else. Morrison ignored them. Through sheer persistence, he'd worn down the armorer's resistance. The crew loaded all 6 Browning .50 caliber machine guns with his custom belt, 2,400 rounds. Nearly all of them silver-tipped M8 incendiaries. No tracers. No warnings. Just invisible fire. Now, as the catapult officer's hand dropped and the steam piston kicked Morrison's Hellcat down the deck, those theoretical debates became terrifyingly real. The plane dipped sickeningly toward the water as it left the carrier's edge, the heavy fuel load and ammunition fighting gravity. Then the massive propeller bit into the humid Pacific air, and the fighter clawed skyward. Morrison climbed hard. Altitude was currency in aerial combat. You could trade it for speed, but you couldn't buy it back when you were in trouble, breaking through clouds at 15,000 feet. He squinted through the oil-smeared windscreen and checked his weapon systems. The belts of M8 ammunition coiled in his wings like sleeping serpents. The radio crackled Vector 270, Angels 20. Multiple bandits inbound. Repeat, multiple bandits. He banked toward the coordinates, the vibration rattling his bones. The squadron had scattered during the scramble. He was essentially alone, flying a compromised aircraft with experimental ammunition against the largest air raid in naval history. Then he saw them, a dark cloud materializing from the haze, growing larger with each heartbeat. Not 10 planes, not 20. A massive formation of at least 50 Japanese bombers and their 0 escorts, stacked in layers like a deadly wedding cake. One damaged American fighter against 50 enemy aircraft. The mathematics of survival seemed impossible, but Morrison wasn't planning to survive. He was planning to hunt. Morrison studied the enemy formation through his oil-streaked canopy. What he saw wasn't just intimidating, it was instructive. The Japanese planes flew in sloppy, undisciplined layers. The dive bombers maintained loose spacing, their movements uncertain. These weren't the veteran pilots who'd terrorized Pearl Harbor. Those warriors were long dead, buried in the coral reefs of Midway and Guadalcanal. These were replacements, experienced kids, with barely enough training to land their aircraft. A rational pilot would have turned back. One failing engine against 50 enemy planes wasn't combat, it was suicide. But Morrison didn't see a threat. He saw opportunity. He saw a target-rich environment. He pulled back on the stick and climbed, pushing his rattling Hellcat up to 24,000 feet. In aerial warfare, the sun is the only real camouflage. Position yourself with the sun at your back, and you become a ghost to your silhouette, hidden in blinding glare that makes enemy gunners helpless. Perched high above the Japanese formation, Morrison felt like a raptor watching prey. He selected his first victim, a Judy dive bomber, drifting slightly off formation. Its pilot struggling to maintain position. Morrison pushed the nose down. The heavy Hellcat dropped like a stone. The airspeed indicator climbing rapidly, 300, 350, 400 knots. The vibration smoothed out, replaced by the high-pitched shriek of wind tearing over the wings. This was the moment of truth. If the experts were right, if the M8 rounds were too unstable or ineffective, he was about to bounce sparks off enemy wings and get shredded by return fire. He closed the distance. 2,000 yards. 1,000. He didn't fire. Rookies panic and spray ammunition from half a mile away, hitting nothing. Morrison waited, watching the Judy grow larger in his gun sight until he could see individual rivets on its fuselage. At 600 yards, he squeezed the trigger short. Controlled burst, lasting less than a second. The result was instantaneous and spectacular. The M8 round slammed into the Judy's wing root where the fuel tanks resided. Instead of trailing smoke, the bomber simply erupted. A violent orange fireball consumed the aircraft in a heartbeat. One moment it was a plane, the next it was burning debris, tumbling toward the ocean. The experts were wrong. Morrison's suicide mix wasn't unstable junk, it was devastatingly effective. He'd turned his guns into FLAM, ETHR, OWERS. Morrison didn't pause. He used his diving speed to zoom back up into the sun before the Japanese gunners could locate him. Looking back, he saw the formation rippling with confusion. The enemy pilots had witnessed their wingman explode, but couldn't identify the attacker. They were scanning for a squadron, never imagining it was one pilot with a leaking engine. He rolled inverted and dove again, selecting his second target, another Judy. This one tight in the formation center. Harder shot. If he missed, he'd overshoot directly into the Zero's sights. Morrison lined up the attack, trusting his theory completely. But the hive was waking up, and the legendary Zero fighters were about to make him pay for his audacity. The second Judy's rear gunner spotted Morrison streaking down at 400 knots. A stream of 7.7mm bullets zipped past his canopy like angry fireflies. Morrison didn't flinch. He waited until the Japanese bomber filled his windscreen, then tapped the trigger, maybe 70 rounds total. The incendiary bullets raked across the Judy's fuselage like a chainsaw. They struck the engine block, igniting the oil in a sheet of white-hot flame. The propeller separated and spun away into the blue sky like a discarded toy. The bomber pitched violently upward, then rolled and fell, trailing thick black smoke. 2 kills in under 2 minutes. Morrison pulled up hard, his protesting engine groaning. He checked his ammunition counters. He'd barely touched his reserves. He'd destroyed 2 aircraft using less ammunition than most pilots expended, just testing their sights. But now the element of surprise was gone. The Zeros at the top of the formation rolled and dove, hunting for the invisible attacker. They knew he was up there in the sun somewhere, waiting to strike again. Morrison watched them come. These weren't the clumsy bombers, these were the killers. The legendary Mitsubishi fighters that had dominated the Pacific for 2 years. Fast, nimble, and now very angry. And they were making a critical mistake. Morrison analyzed their movements with cold precision. They turned a wide, broke formation to eyes. These replacement pilots had minimal combat experience. They were treating this like a traditional dogfight, expecting the American to dance and duel. Morrison wasn't interested in dancing. He was interested in execution. He spotted a Zero that had separated from the group, attempting to cut off his escape route. The Japanese pilot pulled his nose up aggressively, trying to get a shot. For just a second, he hung motionless in the air, a fatal error. Morrison kicked his rudder and dropped the Hellcat's nose, turning into the fight rather than away. He fell toward the stalled Zero, wind screaming, oil smearing his vision. The Japanese pilot realized his mistake too late. Morrison squeezed the trigger. The incendiaries hit the Zero at the wing route. Without self-sealing tanks or armor, the lightweight fighter was essentially gasoline wrapped in magnesium. It didn't burn, it detonated, disintegrating into flaming fragments that fluttered down like deadly confetti. 3 kills in 3 minutes. But as Morrison pulled out of his dive, crushing G-forces, pressing him into his seat, a shadow fell across his cockpit. He looked up to see a dozen Zeros diving on him like an avalanche of steel. He was alone, low on energy, and his engine was shaking so violently the instrument panel was becoming blurry. Most pilots would either turn and dogfight, which was dive for safety, and abandon the mission, which was cowardice. Morrison chose geometry. Instead, the Hellcat was heavy, massively heavy, compared to the lightweight Zero. In a climb, that weight was a penalty. But in a dive, that weight became pure kinetic energy. Morrison slammed the stick forward. The Hellcat didn't just drop, it plummeted like an anvil. The speedometer needle whipped past 400 knots as the airframe groaned under stress. The Zeros tried to follow, but their lightweight construction couldn't handle those speeds. They began to flutter and shake, falling behind. Morrison pulled out violently beneath the bomber formation, using their own aircraft as shields. He'd turned their numbers into his advantage, but the real killing was just beginning. Morrison positioned himself directly below the Japanese bomber formation, a brilliant tactical maneuver. The Zeros above couldn't shoot at him without risking their own dive bombers. He'd transformed their numerical advantage into a liability, becoming the fox in the henhouse, while the farmers couldn't fire for fear of hitting their own chickens. Target number 4 hung directly above him, belly exposed, trudging along at 200 knots. Morrison pulled his nose up, approaching from the blind spot where no gunner could see him. The vibration in his engine had intensified to a rhythmic hammering that threatened to shake the instrument panel loose. He closed to point-blank range 300 yards, 200 yards, then tapped the trigger. The M8 incendiary slammed into the Judy's belly fuel tank. The fuel vapor inside ignited with bomb-like force, blowing the center section outward. Morrison wrenched his stick left to avoid the shower of burning aluminum cascading down. The Japanese formation was panicking now, breaking discipline. Pilots weaved frantically, ruining their defensive overlapping fire patterns. They were making his job easier. Kill number 5 tested his nerve. The pilot saw Morrison coming and banked hard, trying to spoil his aim. It was a good defensive move. But Morrison wasn't aiming at where the plane was, he was aiming at where physics demanded it would be. He kicked his rudder, skidding the Hellcat sideways. Leading the target like a hunter tracking a duck, he pressed the trigger for a slightly longer burst, maybe a second and a half. The stream of silver-tipped M8 South caught the Judy in the engine cowling. The magnesium flared white-hot, and the bomber exploded less than 100 yards in front of him. There was no time to turn. Morrison clenched his teeth and flew straight into the fireball. For one terrifying moment, his world was orange flame and black smoke. Debris hammered his wings with the sound of gravel on tin. Then he emerged on the other side, windshield coated in fresh soot, wings dented and scorched but still flying, 5 down. The sky behind him was littered with parachutes floating down like jellyfish. But there was no time for counting. Zeros swarmed from all angles now, desperate to kill this single American pest. Tracers zipped past like laser beams. Morrison had tunnel vision. One more Judy trailed the pack, black smoke pouring from its exhaust as the pilot pushed his engine, trying to rejoin the herd's safety. Morrison cut the corner, pushing his throttle through the gate. Ignoring the temperature gauge pegged in the red zone, he closed to point-blank range 100 yards, 50 yards. So close he could see the rivets on the tail, could see the rear gunner frantically trying to unjam his weapon. Morrison squeezed the trigger one final time. The guns roared briefly, then stopped. Not jammed, the target simply ceased to exist. The M8 rounds sawed the tail completely off. The bomber snapped in half mid-air, the front tumbling forward, the rear spinning away. 6 kills in 8 minutes. Morrison checked his watch, then his ammunition counters. Approximately 360 rounds fired. That was 60 bullets per airplane. The experts had said you needed 1,000 rounds to kill a bomber. Morrison had just proven them catastrophically wrong. But as friendly anti-aircraft fire began exploding around him, he faced his greatest challenge yet, surviving his own fleet. The silence in Morrison's cockpit shattered with a new sound, anti-aircraft flak. He'd chased the enemy so far that he'd flown into the defensive umbrella of the American fleet. Below him, battleships and destroyers of Task Force 58 opened up with everything they had, filling the sky with black puffs of exploding shells. They were shooting at the Japanese, but they didn't know Morrison was there. To the nervous gunners below, he was just another speck in the sky, another threat to eliminate. A 5-inch shell exploded near his right wing, the concussion rocking the Hellcat violently. Shrapnel pinged off the fuselage. Morrison cursed he'd survived 50 enemy planes, only to nearly die at the hands of his own Navy. He banked hard, flashing his belly toward the fleet, trying to show his American silhouette. He dove toward the water, skimming the waves at 300 miles per hour, getting under the radar and the guns. He turned toward the Lexington, toward home. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion. His hands trembled on the stick. His flight suit was drenched in sweat. The smell of cordite and fear filled the cockpit. "Lexington, this is Morrison, coming home. Prepare the deck." The controller's voice came back, stunned. They'd been watching the radar, watching blips disappear one by one. "Copy that, Morrison. The deck is yours. What's your status?" Morrison glanced at his fuel gauge, nearly empty. His ammo counters half full. The smoke trail staining the horizon behind him told the rest of the story. "Status is green," Morrison said, his voice cracking slightly. "But tell the armorer to prep more of those silver bullets. I think I found a use for them." He dropped his landing gear and flaps, lined up with the postage-stamped carrier deck floating in the vast blue ocean. The engine sputtered on fumes. The hook caught the wire. The harness slammed his chest as the plane jerked to a halt. He was down. He was alive. Morrison slid the canopy back and breathed fresh sea air. It tasted impossibly sweet. The deck crew ran toward him, staring at the soot dents and oil covering his battered fighter. He saw the armorer, the same chief who'd called him crazy, who'd fought him on the custom ammunition. The chief was staring at the gun ports, blackened with soot, but barely warm. Morrison cracked a tired smile and held up 6 fingers. That gesture, captured accidentally by a Navy photographer, became the defining image of the Pacific War. But the real story happened moments later. When the armorer popped open the wing panels, he expected to find melted barrels and disaster. Instead, he found ammunition belts still heavy with rounds. "How?" the chief asked, looking up at Morrison. "You barely touched the triggers." Morrison jumped down, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "I told you, Chief," he said, smoke curling around his exhausted face. "I didn't need to shred them. I just needed to light them." The ridicule stopped. The mockery evaporated. Suddenly every pilot in the squadron wanted the Morrison belt. June 19th, 1944. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The American fleet shot down over 4 Japanese aircraft in the most lopsided aerial victory in history. The Japanese Naval Air Force was effectively destroyed in an afternoon, never to recover. Morrison finished the war as the Navy's 4th-ranking ace, with 19 confirmed kills. He had medals that weighed more than his shirt. He could have stayed in the spotlight, but that wasn't his style. He became a banker in California, spending 30 years approving mortgage loans. Customers who sat across from his desk saw a quiet, gentle man with a friendly smile. They had no idea those hands had once turned 6 airplanes into falling stars in 8 minutes. He rarely spoke about the war. When people asked about the turkey shoot, he'd just shrugged. "I was doing my job. The mechanics did the real work." In naval aviation schools, instructors still teach the Morrison technique, the discipline to hold fire until point-blank range. They teach that technology is important, but instinct matters more. That sometimes the conventional way is wrong, and the unorthodox way is the only path to survival. Alex Morrison passed away in 2015 at age 96, peacefully in his sleep, decades removed from the smell of burning magnesium and the vibration of a Hellcat engine. But look at that famous photograph again. Look at the grin, the grease, the exhausted triumph. That isn't the face of a banker. That's the face of a man who looked at the impossible, laughed, and burned it down. We tell these stories not to glorify violence, but to remember ingenuity. History remembers generals and admirals, but it forgets the lieutenants who modified their ammunition belts, who ignored the rulebook because the rulebook would get them killed. Morrison was told his idea was stupid, his tactics suicidal. He was told to shut up and fly like everyone else. If he'd listened, the USS Lexington might rest at the bottom of the Pacific. But he didn't listen. He loaded his guns with fire, flew into the sun, and proved that sometimes the only difference between a madman and a genius is whether or not you miss. If this story of courage and innovation inspired you, Hit that like button and subscribe for more untold tales of the warriors who rewrote history by breaking the rules. Share this with someone who needs to hear that sometimes defying conventional wisdom is the only way to win. What other forgotten heroes should we uncover? Drop your suggestions in the comments below.